we're in very, very early stages of this AI revolution. The amount of things that we're going to be doing with AI is minuscule compared to where it's going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
OpenAI at some point had stated directly, publicly, that you were one of their main competitors. But at the same time, you're able to leverage and partner with them.
So I don't actually worry about competition. I've never worried about it. Glean started in early 2019, which makes us the world's first enterprise generative AI company.
I particularly remember your vision was to build like Google for enterprise. That vision changed.
1/3 of all employee time is spent just like trying to find things. So we wanted to solve for that. When you work with 1,000+ customers, you kind of see what usage patterns are today.
A lot of application companies with their data advantage are also coming to the modern businesses. Cursor has Composio, etc. Is that also something?
Yeah. In fact, today, if all of us came together, if all the model companies, if all the application layer companies like us, and became one company and we start to deliver products and services without competition to all the enterprises, we will still fall short. We still won't meet even 10% of the demand.
Hey, Arvind, thank you for joining us. You're one of the technology luminaries of our time. You started many massive companies. Rubrik went public, now we can Glean. I know you and Karan have a history together. He worked with you at Glean, at Rubrik, and then this led to this partnership that we have with Glean and Composio. Can you tell me how you met Karan, how that started?
Yeah, as you said, first of all, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Karan and I have known each other since our Rubrik days, where he was one of our early star engineers. So that's how we got to know each other. And when he started this company, and he was building technology which kind of made sense for us to to partner on. So it was a clear choice, because we believe in him. Yeah.
Thanks a ton. Obviously, I think Rubrik was the first company that I joined. Thanks a ton for having me there. I think that's where I essentially learned how to build systems, how to build the engineering team. And thanks a ton for believing in us for the first time, and that has shaped our product as well.
Can you briefly explain what Glean does and its history as a company? I know you guys started as an enterprise search company, sort of vector search, RAG systems. You moved to something much broader. In a recent podcast, you described it as something like a superset of ChatGPT and Claude code. So yeah, can you talk me through what the product is today and how you sort of got here, what the history looks like?
Yeah. So Glean started in early 2019, which makes us the world's first enterprise generative AI company. Well, just to be clear, the term generative AI did not exist at the time, but we were the first ones to play with transformers and language models and bring these technologies to the enterprises. And we were doing it for our first product that we had built, which was search for employees within their own company. I don't know how many people know this, but the origins of transformers and language models is initially these things were built at Google with the single purpose of making Google search smarter, more intelligent. So when we started Glean, and we were also building a search product for businesses, like I said, it made all the sense for us to use this technology. So that's how we became the first ones to bring transformers to the enterprises. The reason we wanted to solve that problem was our own experience at Rubrik, and in fact, actually my experiences at Google before that, where I used to work. It's always been incredibly hard to actually find the information that you need to get answers to questions that you have that allows you to then go make progress on the things that you're working on. It's deeply frustrating. It used to be at Rubrik, it was our lowest scoring question in our pulse surveys. People complaining that it was so hard to find information that they needed to do their work. So that's how we got started. Now we've evolved from that. So in addition to actually, of course, having this product that looks like Google or ChatGPT inside your company, one place where people come in and ask questions or give us some work to do. And what Glean does is it uses both the best models that are out there that can actually help solve this task or answer this question. And these models come from companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and all the open source models. But more importantly, what Glean does is it's connected to all of your company's internal data and systems. It knows where every single piece of knowledge or data is inside your company. It knows who has permissions to use that information internally. It's also understands deeply, like, what content, what data is fresh, up to date, relevant, high quality. So we sort of had that, that context of your business, your data, your knowledge, and how work happens inside the company. And we're able to use that context and that knowledge along with all these great AI models and technology to then start to work for you. And the way you work with Glean is you ask questions, you give us tasks. You can think of us as a superset of ChatGPT, Claude, Cowork, or Gemini. Like, we will actually solve that task using all of that company's context, and in fact, picking the right models, the best models for each of the subtasks, that we will have to execute to complete that task. So that's sort of one product, like very simple. Use us just like how you use ChatGPT. But underlying that is this platform that's connected to all of your enterprise systems, where we're able to read information, we're able to take actions, and where we actually partner with you. We are able to understand the security and governance of all of that data, and we're able to build this deep context and knowledge graph of our enterprise. And all of that platform is also, just like how it's available to our own product that we deliver to our customers, that platform is also available to our customers to directly integrate into their other AI systems. So many of our customers, for example, connect their Claude Code or Claude Cowork or Cursor with the Glean MCP gateway that brings that intelligence and context of your company to those tools and make them better. So that's how you should think about Glean: an enterprise AI platform and a coworker.
So I remember, I think even in Rubrik days, I particularly remember your vision was to build like Google for enterprises.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, you started Glean with also that like vision.
Yeah.
How is that like given like during that time language models came along the way, etc. How has that vision changed, or has it remained?
It has expanded so much. So like we were all, I think the most exciting thing for me personally was, number one, to build a product for myself. Like, that was actually the driving factor, and for everybody who I know. And I knew that everybody struggled with finding information. So we were actually quite happy first just actually solving that use case, which is that every employee, whenever you need some information, we're going to make it super fast for you. 1/3 of all employee time is spent just like trying to find things. So we wanted to solve for that. The AI of the day was kind of like, capable of doing that. It was capable of helping us understand data, knowledge, content. It was capable of us helping understand what questions people are asking and do a good matching between them. But AI in that time was not capable of riding on its own or doing deep reasoning or thinking. But it was still a step change. Like, when we started Glean, we used transformers, and our search was already this, what later on, like 2 or 3 years later, the industry started to call it semantic search or vector search. We built them like well before these terms were coined by the industry. We used to call it embedding search internally. That was the name that we chose for this concept that we had built. And remember that sometimes people think of Google as one type of experience and ChatGPT as other. Where Google is, that I ask a question and you surface, 10 links to me. ChatGPT is I ask a question and you give me an answer. But that dichotomy is actually not true. Google for decades have actually also tried to, when you come and ask questions, try to give an answer. And it didn't need generative AI models for a long time to do that. So we used to do the same. When we started Glean, oftentimes when people came and asked questions, we would surface an answer back to that user, but that answer was extracted from your corpus, not generated by AI. And then as AI got better, we obviously were able to now start to use the generative capabilities to in fact answer questions for people. So over time, like our sort of goal and mission remains the same, which is we want to make people do extraordinary work. Like, we want to help them untap, their potential to do extraordinary work. That's our mission statement. And for that, graduating from helping them find things to answering their questions to actually now doing some work for them to actually becoming that holistic platform at an enterprise level, that allows a company to actually operate with a new level of intelligence. We feel like, it's just a evolution and expansion of our mission, which, this great technology has allowed us to actually enable.
I guess this is a question about like a tech tree choice, right? Like you guys started going very deep on what you called embedding search within the industry, later called semantic search or vector search. And then like later we sort of see this like both in terms of what you're describing as the ability for agents to do work, but also you're seeing agentic search sort of calling the tools and as an agent in a sandbox or in a loop generally seems to be much more successful and you're able to do much more with it, or it sort of democratizes this like vector search product in some way. How did you guys think about that inside Glean, and how do you think about that transition? Because you guys had a very successful business in this, and you transitioned to this other thing also extremely successfully.
Well, I mean, I think internally for us, like sometimes we get a lot of credit for pivoting the company from A to B to C. And internally we think about that, like, I don't think we're getting more credit than we deserve. I think like we were simply taking advantage of the technology that was being built around us. And it's been like, in some sense, very natural progression of starting with search as the first problem that we solve for people, to answering questions for them, to actually doing work for them, because it's all like, it's all correlated with the advancements in the AI models and technology.
I guess there's always a sort of this like, this trade-off curve that you're making when you're building products about like focusing on what's working, focusing on the new thing. I think that's where the credit is sort of coming on the question about like, was there like an innovator's dilemma or sort of a push and pull within the company? It's like, hey, this thing is working super well and we have to go down this new bet. This is the new
I think
bet.
that was obvious. That was obvious for us.
Okay.
Like, like the world, and I think there's a good parallel in the consumer world. Like, and we didn't have to actually wait for that. It was also obvious to us too. Like, if I have a question, I don't want to actually go read a long document to get an answer for that. Like, I do prefer, a ChatGPT like experience. So, and it was clear to us that we also have to deliver it. Like, yes, ChatGPT was initially launched only for consumers, but like, in an enterprise, of course, it's the same people who use that product in their personal lives. So I don't think we had a choice. We had a, question or, in that sense, like, we were basically, we had to do these, like advance our product, and it actually made all the sense, and people were excited. And I mean, that's how our R&D team works. Like, they are always looking at like, what are the new things, we could be doing. Within the company also, we have this concept, that we learned from Google, this concept of 70-30, where 70% of our team is focused on short and medium term deliverables, like, thinking about the current product roadmap, how to evolve it. And then we have another 30% who are, working on moonshot bets, trying to think about new things, that we could be building. So that's been the, the kind of journey, for us.
So I know for this sort of agentic search and like actions, transition, and maybe it's not a pivot, it was a natural roadmap. I know we played a huge part as like Composio and helping in that. So we'd love to talk about like where we were helpful, where we sort of came into the picture, how that partnership came about.
Yeah. So look, like and part of it is also like, users who you serve. So as we started to actually launch these agentic capabilities, as people could do more and more advanced analysis, deep research with Glean, the natural question from all of our customers was that, well, I mean, I think, yes, it's great to bring information to people. It's great to actually give them these tools to analyze data, to get them to write some content for you. But ultimately, like, if, like everybody started to see the potential of that, now AI was ready to actually do some work, like, do like complete the cycle, like not just do the first part of that, like, of any given task, which is research and data collection and analysis. But now you can actually complete the work, like, if you're going to save that work in some of your systems. So that required us to have, like, start to think about actions. We actually built actions also, like, probably like roughly the same time that you started to build it. But for us, like, our model at, at Glean has always been, we want to actually work on things that others are not. And we are very much a partner-focused company. And so if we see great innovation that is happening elsewhere, and if we have the ability to actually embrace that innovation, then we'll always make that choice. And so when you think about you, it's very much like, like the partnership that we have with you is kind of similar to the partnership we have with OpenAI or Google or Anthropic. There's great tech, that they've built, and they make it available as a platform. So when they do, we want to actually leverage it. as opposed to sort of having to reinvent that. And the same motivation we had, was with you. You were deeply focused on that one specific area of actions, and we felt that you would go fast. You would actually go deep. You remember this, actions it's been a long journey, and while it's easy to build a quick select system that can actually make a REST API call and and make an action, execute a REST API call, but doing it the right way with the right parameters and sort of taking a task which requires you to make 4 different API calls, ultimately you start to run into lots and lots of complications. And for a long time, LLMs were not good at it, and so we knew that for a company that's focused on making that happen, they'll do a good job, and we would like to partner with them.
So I guess, that sort of leads us, thank you for trusting us, betting on us so early, but leads us into the next question that I was been thinking a lot about. You sort of mentioned partnering with OpenAI, Anthropic, these people. How do you think about competition in this space, right? Because when I see Glean's product, clearly you guys are doing exceptionally well. The product is growing really well. I've heard speculative revenue numbers that I don't necessarily want you to comment on, but you guys are growing really fast, doing really well. But very much in the product roadmap of something like an Anthropic or OpenAI, the way they stated, I think OpenAI at some point had stated directly, publicly, that you were one of their main competitors. But at the same time, you're able to leverage and partner with them. And if you look at your contemporaries in coding, like a Cursor or Cognition are doing exceptionally well, while they have maybe even more fierce competition. So how do you as an entrepreneur think about navigating this? And how would you suggest we navigate this in terms of thinking about building products?
I think we first need to have this awareness that we're in very, very early stages of this AI revolution that we are in. The amount of things that we're going to be doing with AI right now is minimal. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, I guess in some sense, AI has made a lot of progress over the last few years, but it's minuscule compared to where it's going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So there's a very, very big opportunity for all companies that are leveraging AI to build valuable products for customers, and I actually find it kind of ridiculous to sort of think in a way that, hey, one or a model company or another model company will basically make it unnecessary for all other companies to even exist. In fact, today, if all of us came together, if all the model companies, if all the application layer companies like us, platform companies like yours, if all of us came together and became one company and we start to deliver products and services without competition to all the enterprises, we will still fall short. We still won't meet even 10% of the demand that enterprises have, what they want to do with AI. That's the first realization that every startup needs to actually have. Don't focus too much on competition and what other players are going to do. Your biggest competition or your biggest challenge is going to be just you yourself. And can you execute? Can you build a high quality product? Can you actually talk about it? Can you take it to the market? Can you earn the trust of your customers? Can you do well for them? Those are the real challenges, not whether somebody else is also doing what you're doing. Because it's not as if there are only 10 companies that we're all selling the products to. The customer set is actually almost infinite. So that's my take. So I don't actually worry about competition. I've never worried about it. A lot of people talk about us being directly, like you mentioned, an OpenAI has mentioned it, or the market does recognize us as the pioneers in enterprise AI and search. And whenever another large company, and this is quite often when they come and build a product like Glean now, we get the recognition that they're building a product like ours. So that is there. There are a lot of companies they're doing things that we are, and the only real reasonable response as an entrepreneur that that I could have is, well, I mean, we will be focused on our customers, we'll be focused on our product, and we're just going to do better, and we're going to do it with our eyes wide open. And if there are other players in the market and they want to compete, Well, I mean, like, I think first let's see that, whether we can try to partner with them. And that's what we do with, OpenAI and others, that they build great technology which they, as a platform company, make available to companies like us. So that's sort of like, our strategy, like, by kind of like, always, like, you can't actually, of course, partner with everybody. You cannot, like, if you also, you also cannot say that if somebody else is building something, that I won't build it. But in general, like, it makes sense to have that strategy where you try to do things, which are unique, uniquely suited to your strengths. So for us, that is, search, that is building these deep knowledge graphs, context graphs, building an understanding of how your business works. And we still, like, that particular area is something that we are the best in. We focus on that. Other people are not focused on that. And everything, surrounding that is where we will have a partner first strategy. If you can get something with the market, we'll use it. And that allows us to compete.
So there is kind of a thing where a lot of application companies with their data advantage and other things are also coming into the model business as well to a certain extent, like Cursor has Composer, etc.
Yeah.
Is that also something
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, like I think for Glean too, that's an important one. I think before even talking about companies like us, for enterprises, we talk to a lot of them every day. One of the biggest, sort of concerns that they have today is over dependence on model providers. And this independence that you need as an enterprise, like, you want to make sure that model is a technology that you can use, but the context of how your business works, your proprietary business processes, your sort of unique differentiators, that all of those things, you remain in full control of yourself. There's this concept of that, over time, AI is going to do more and more work in the enterprise. But how is AI getting better? Those learnings are compounding, and who owns those learnings? And enterprises need to be in full control of that. So even at an individual customer level, there's a lot of focus on how to actually not fully depend on model providers. For applied AI companies like ours, it's the same thing. Like, we cannot have a huge dependency on any one provider for our technology stack. Open source models are actually fantastic. So, Glean being multi-model, like, we actually work with all the different models that are out there, including open source.
I guess this sort of transitions very nicely into like, if you had to say, like, what percentage of tokens on Glean are on like a frontier American model versus some of these like Chinese open source models?
Yeah. Well, today is dominantly, like, on the American models. But it is like the inflection point actually just recently happened.
Was that like a Kimi K3 or a GLM 5.2?
Yeah, I would say GLM 5.2 was, I mean, Kimi K3 came after that, right? But so GLM 5.2 was really when it became super clear that now you can actually fully rely on open source models for over 90% of all enterprise AI tasks.
I guess I have two sort of tangential questions.
Yeah.
There seems to be this like sort of cyclic every 8 to 12 months where open source sort of catches up to the frontier, and then frontier pulls ahead, and then it's a spread, right? Like, if you take back to DeepSeek I1 or even further back to Mistral 8X 7B, it's like, oh, we're coming up to the frontier delta is small, and frontier pushes much further ahead. And I guess a sort of tangential question to that is like, how do you, like, as both a buyer of these language models and talking to enterprises buying and buying these models, how do you think about like, like as an enterprise or as a purchaser of tokens, can I sign a 1-year contract with Anthropic if the thing is changing so quickly? So there's sort of two questions, which is like, right now we're in this moment where like the open source is caught up to the frontier. Will the frontier again just pull ahead?
Yeah, got it. So see, first on the open source, it's not like we are not in the same moment as we were 6 months back or 12 months back. I think this is the first time. And I think, like I say, for example, our own engineering team, like, we've been always evaluating open source models, and our team's decision was always that they were not ready. Like, and they were of course comparing with the frontier at the time, and the conclusion was that they were not ready, and we never bothered to use them. That only changed for the first time now. And so there's and that's like in a lot of other companies are going through that same thing, that they're now feeling that yes, like they can do a lot of work with open source. So there is a change, and you will see, in fact, like my own belief is that in the next 12 to 18 months we'll see majority of inferencing shift to open source in enterprises, and of course you'll have US based models in open source. I mean, I think some of it is you cannot even, I think it's not an option, like we have to have that, and companies are working hard at that. Now on the second question of, in this sort of really dynamic landscape, like who do you which model do you use, who do you sign contracts with? That's you're absolutely right that that's an incredibly hard problem. And first think about individual enterprises, and I'm not talking about a mid-sized company. I'm talking about even a large enterprise, that do have budgets, like they could potentially spend $1 billion on AI today. Even for those companies, it's extremely hard for them to actually figure out how much to commit to each of these models, and put aside open source. Even within the frontier models from these top 3 or 4 companies, the race is so dynamic. You never know who's winning, and so it's incredibly hard to actually make that commitment. And you do need players who can sort of absorb that risk and make it easier for you. So, and I think Glean comes Glean is a good solution for enterprises that way, where we have our AI gateway and Model Garden, and we tell our customers that you can just work with us. You sign one commit with Glean, and with that commit you can actually use as much of OpenAI or Claude or Gemini, and you can sort of flexibly allocate your spend there, and you can also use open source. So we make the job easy for them. Now of course the problem shifts to us, as a startup. Now we have to figure out how much commitments we make. But I think for us it works. It's easier because when you work with 1,000+ customers, you kind of see what usage patterns are today, and in a growing market where you know that you're going to be spending double of what you're spending, or 5 times of what you're spending today, it's easy to sort of bake in some commits with each one of them, where the total commit for us also is probably low, only half or a third of what we're actually going to spend, and that allows us to have enough flexibility in our system as well.
So many interesting points, right? But the first thing I wanted to sort of come back to is we're talking a lot about how enterprises are thinking to allocate budgets and use models. What's actually working and not working in the usage of enterprise, AI inside enterprises, right? Yeah. You had this tweet where you talked about, you sort of cited the all-in thing where Chamath is talking about how 45% token spend is going up every month or every 2 months, and there's 5% extra productivity. There's all these questions about, is the ROI there? Is the ROI not there? Where do you think these models are quite diffused, especially I'm curious in general, but especially outside coding, where do you think the diffusion is weak, and why the diffusion is weak?
The number one issue right now with every enterprise is cost. Everybody rolled AI in a pretty aggressive manner to all of their workforce. People are doing things with AI, and AI is such a broad technology. You can do it, use it to do all kinds of things. And it's becoming very hard for businesses to measure actual return on investment on AI. Most of them have no idea what's happening, and they didn't care for the last 2 years, because it is obvious, of course, that every company should be investing in AI. First, just for the purposes of even modernizing your workforce, making sure that they are ready for that future, where AI is going to be more and more dominant. So it kind of makes all the sense, but it has reached, the expense has reached the level where now they don't have the money to actually support this, unless if they can actually prove it with bottom line or top line improvements. So that's the state of the industry. 45%, 5%, all of that, I don't know, they're all made up numbers. The reality is that yes, like enterprise don't have visibility into it. And there are two ways to solve for that. One is that you have to bring down the cost of this tech, and I think open source models are going to actually help us a lot with that. In fact, like Glean's mission, like right now, when we have conversations with customers, like that's the first thing that we tell them, that like, look, we understand your costs are so super high with AI. We are the solution, for you as an enterprise AI platform that's going to minimize your costs. Yeah.
I think when you're saying like cost is the number one sort of concern, that's implicitly saying like the technology is not useful enough that this cost is like
it's useful. Everybody thinks it's useful,
but not enough.
But hard to measure. Whether it's enough or not is not the complaint from people. It's hard to measure because a lot of it is very subjective. Like people are, and I think and part of it is just like connecting the dots. Like for example, think about your customer support team. They're using AI, and they are actually likely resolving more cases every day than before, or they're actually resolving those cases much faster than before. And actually, you do have metrics for those. Like like customer service teams actually track these as to their top 2 metrics, and a lot of these companies have been able to see a clear improvement. For example, one of the largest telcos in the US, they use Glean to run all of their customer care function. Every time new tickets come, cases come, like Glean is actually helps those agents resolve those cases faster. And I'm talking about like a stat from last year, well before, like now we can do so much more. Even last year, we had already improved their case, the time to resolve a case by 48%. So they knew it, and that's why they're willing to pay for it. And it's generates tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of savings for them. So when you use AI to solve problems at a departmental level, that's when you can start to measure. But a lot of companies haven't reached that state. They're still, the first thing, of course, what you do is just give AI to everybody in the company and let them use it. And the other one, where coding, of course, is where in some ways you can claim a lot of productivity gains, because of course you're writing many more lines of code. Your number of commits are going up on a daily basis. Number of Jira resolved probably is also going up. But even there, like sometimes people feel like, okay, well, like did we just shift the bottleneck from one place to somewhere else? Like, are you actually shipping the product faster or not? That is a question that is sometimes hard for companies to resolve.
I guess like one way you can think about this is like percentage of tokens relative to like headcount, and then like how headcount moves there, right? Because like at the end of the day, it's like if
I don't believe in that, by the way. I actually just don't like those two things to be in the same sentence.
Okay.
Headcount and token spend or budgets. I think for AI vendors or AI technology providers to say that it's a trade-off between labor cost and how much AI you can have, I think it's the most ridiculous thing, that like I've never heard of that in my entire over 3 decades career in technology. Like tech spend, is a very, very small fraction of how your business runs.
I guess the question is like Salesforce reported they spent $300 million on tokens they ran out, and for engineering, and there was like 3% of like engineering salaries. And like if you are believing the sort of thing that like Anthropic or OpenAI is selling about the future, like the expectation is this 3% maybe becomes 20%, maybe becomes 150%. So it's not that this is a trade-off. This is like it comes from a OpEx budget, and before software had almost no marginal net cost. It's like relatively cheap to keep running, versus like now it has this extreme marginal net cost.
I think that's just what we are today, where it is today.
And so your expectation is that it'll again become something like a no marginal net cost.
I actually think that the cost of doing work is going to significantly reduce. It was never zero. Like there's always any type of work that you do, you're always burning CPU cycles to do that work. But it is basically so low compared to the utility that software would provide to you, and that's why you actually would say that it was like there's no marginal cost, right? And I think like AI should be, in my opinion, the same way. Like why is it like it is software? It is like running inference, on a machine learning model. So what makes it, dramatically expensive is just because of how it works today. So I think the long term, like, I guess like sometimes, like nobody knows answers. So it's kind of more hope than prediction that AI technology is also going to become much cheaper. And you can see, like, there's we know one lever of how that's going to happen is by, AI models becoming more task specific. Like once you specialize a model to do a certain thing, you already know today, like, and we are achieving it, through distillation, through, post training. We're already seeing that the same task, like, that you, like today, Opus is going to consume a lot of, like, cycles, GPU cycles to actually compute. If you can't, if you create, a very small model that does only that one thing very well, you can achieve that same level of performance, but like, at a 2 or 3 orders of magnitude less cost. So that's sort of, we know that is one way, like this tech is going to become cheaper. There are hopefully going to be, like, a lot of more other things like that.
So I think when enterprises are deciding about their AI budget, I think to a certain extent they are still kind of thinking about how much per person they are willing to spend. Right?
Yeah.
Is that, like, given background agents are also becoming a thing, where it's not exactly one-to-one mapping to a person in the company, is that thought process changing, or does it need to change while thinking about how much you need to spend in AI?
Well, I actually like this process of establishing budgets on a per person basis, and you can have different budgets by different departments. I like that concept because ultimately businesses, also, like, it's very hard to change them overnight. Think about Walmart. Walmart cannot basically just immediately completely change, their working model, their budget planning process, like how, these things are super complex. And so you do have to think in that mode. And these new kind of things, like, for example, background agents, like the right way to probably think about that is that, okay, well, I'm going to keep a discretionary budget pool, and those are the ones that I can assign to them. But I do, like, they already have very established model of how to actually think about their overall expenditure, and a lot of that actually gets associated, it's in proportion to the payroll. And so that, so that model does make sense, for majority of AI spend, and then for some you can actually have this discretionary budget.
I guess, like, understanding, like, it's very interesting because, like, yes, there is some marginal cost of running a CPU cycle. It's just so small, you think about it as rounding to zero. So I guess, like, if I perceive the world model correctly, it's something like you're not expecting that token spend relative to headcount becomes like 20%, 50%. It is like very, very small, but we use way more tokens. Is that sort of the correct model? Like, it's actually like we will spend way less than we're spending today, but we will spend way more, like maybe multiple orders.
I think we will all do, like, a lot more work with AI. I think we hopefully will also stop talking about tokens. Like, we were never talking about, like, for a long time we've never talked about the number of CPU cycles, or, like, that a task takes. Like, who like, nobody cares about that. Like, and so I think hopefully, this over fixation on tokens also is going to go away in the next few years. But your point is correct that we're all going to be doing more, not less, with AI, and it's still going to actually cost us less than what it costs us today.
I guess then there's a question about, like, is the, like, public market capex allocation, like, wrong? Because they're expecting that it, like, there's the revenue curves, like, Anthropic might hit 100 billion in a run rate by the end of the year. It's expecting to go up. Like this model is, like, amazing. It sounds like amazing, right? It's like, oh, I will do more. And it's like, yeah, like, why should I think about a token or care about a token?
Well, I think investors are smarter than me, so, like, I don't want to actually really comment, whether they got it wrong or right. And, that's a very complex question, and I think let's talk about something that I can comment on, and that is that today, as we were talking before, the value of AI, the business value that it generates, you talk to most enterprises, they will say that it's lagging the investment by a very significant margin. And so I do think that there are two narratives in the industry. One of them, which is all in on AI and bullish, and that like AI is going to be half of your of your sort of OpEx, and people are going to be other half of your OpEx. That's and I think that narrative to me is problematic. Like I think it's kind of like you don't deserve to talk about all of that until you first get businesses to realize that value and agree and talk about it.
So I guess that's actually a very interesting side, right? We've been talking about the cost side of this return on investment curve a lot. I guess like where do you find like that the value is not being as successful? Because like of course in code it's like it's able to write a lot, maybe the bottleneck has moved to review or something else. But in sort of like other tasks, in like knowledge work tasks, do you find like where are the bottlenecks today in the model just being more useful? Because like most of the time when you talk to one of these models, it's like on one very specific domain, they're likely smarter than you already. But it's like in some way they have jagged and they have some bottlenecks. Where do you find those bottlenecks for like your own usage, Glean's usage, but also like your customers' usage?
Yeah. Well, first let's talk about like business value, and I mean like we are able to with Glean, we focus a lot on that. We focus on departmental agents, business processes that we can automate with AI. And as we go and work with our customers, we always talk to them about that, look, we're going to do this engagement. You will be using Glean, you'll be building all these agents, but don't do all of that work before you even know the metrics to measure that success. Like how would you know that, value was added? So first actually agree on how you measure efficiency and productivity for that particular task. So we'll go, for example, take a legal team, like if you work with them, like one of the metrics for them would be like how many contracts can one contract lawyer handle on a daily basis. For support, we already talked about how many cases you can do. For a sales rep trying to actually do outbound prospecting, you basically measure how many meetings they can actually generate on a daily basis. So when you start to like go deep, for many of these functions, you do have productivity metrics, and then you make that, establish the baseline, then you actually build agents, and then you actually see improvements to that baseline, and that way now you have a very, very strict way of measuring value. So that's the way to actually ultimately for enterprises to justify that investment in AI. Unfortunately, it just didn't happen like that. Like AI was just there was this panic. Like every CEO, every boardroom said that you got to invest in AI. Show me what's happening. And in fact, like we were not talking about value. Like just 4 months back, we were talking about token maxing. We were talking about that the success criteria for enterprises, as pushed by the tech industry was that, well, like as long as your people are burning tokens, you are in good shape, right? So that's sort of like where we are. So it's a matter of just getting that going, having a more established, like more formal AI programs at enterprises. That will basically close the gap between measuring value.
But I guess the question I'm sort of asking
Yeah.
is more like, where are they very good at generating value quickly, and where are they like still very weak? Like where are they hobbled? Where are they not as useful as they could be, as their like intelligence suggests they are?
Which functions probably, or
Which functions? Well, I mean, that's what I was saying, that the people are seeing value across engineering, support, sales, quite a bit, also in marketing. So they're seeing, like, my point to you was that with the right approach, you are seeing success everywhere, like in all functions. Like we're seeing value being generated in all of them. Of course, you're like, for many companies, the R&D or sales tend to be the biggest department. So the most value realization potential actually happens in those two, or in customer care. So like I would like, if you asked me this question 1 year back, I would say that like the real impact is only being felt by engineering and customer support. But today, like that's not the case. Today you can actually generate value across all the different departments. And the stumbles are actually not so much that here for this particular function, AI is not there yet. Actually, AI is there for all knowledge work now. It's more that did you like follow the right approach? Did you actually get the right tools? That actually is a more of a determinant of success versus not.
And like, okay, like I'd love to speak to that. Like we talked a little bit about like, okay, if you want to capture value, you have to measure it and think about it methodologically. But like, what are those like tools or things that you need to do that where you are able to sort of make the models more valuable for specific functions?
Yeah.
Like, what are you guys doing that's sort of enabling that?
Well, I think you need, first of all, for AI to work in the enterprise, to add value for your different business processes, you have to actually be able to go deep into understanding, how your business works. You have to be able to go and connect into all of your enterprise systems. And you guys come into play there a lot, because without your platform, like there's a lot of work that a business has to do to actually go build that agent that can, complete that work, take actions in your enterprise systems. Of course, you need the basic technology in place, which includes models, which includes enterprise like search and retrieval technologies. It requires, the actions platform. Like these are the core pieces of infrastructure that you have to first put in place. And this is now going to actually allow you to generate value. The one thing that which I feel today, oftentimes people build these agents and they use MCP as basically the primary method to gather context to build those agents, and then they fail because these agents are not performing at the level that their humans were. And the reason for that is simple, because these agents kind of are like your employee on day one. Like, yes, you pointed them to some documentation, but they don't really have that context and that immersion that has happened, like to a person who's been there doing that work for 2 years. So we're increasingly seeing this demand for investing in that deep context graph, understanding your subject matter experts, understanding how those experts today get things done, which is not the way of doing those things is not documented properly. So that has sort of become a big bottleneck, and that's where we come in, and that that kind of closes the gap between having agents that work like your day one employee versus your tenured employee.
I think that makes sense. And I think I'll wrap it so we don't go too long. Thank you for spending time with us.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me.